It was just another ordinary day for Emily Dawson, or so everyone thought. The dull hum of fluorescent lights filled the air as she pushed her cleaning cart through the sterile hallways of the corporate office. The floors gleamed under the bright lights, almost as if they were too clean, too perfect. But for Emily, it was just another day of doing her job. She pushed the cart along, slowly and methodically, making her way down the long rows of empty desks. The sound of her mop sloshing in the bucket echoed in the quiet halls. To the busy employees, she was just another janitor, a nameless face they passed in the halls, unnoticed, unimportant. No one ever looked at her twice. She was invisible, blending in with the background. People barely noticed when she wiped down a desk or mopped the floor. Most of them didn't care. They were too busy with their own lives, their own work. Some even acted annoyed when they had to step around her cart or wait for her to finish cleaning. They thought she was just a lowly employee, someone who didn't matter. Someone who wasn't worth paying attention to. But no one knew the truth about Emily. Behind the mop and the cleaning supplies, she carried a secret, one that could destroy everything the company's management held dear. It wasn't just her job as a janitor that kept her in the office. Emily had been sent there for a very specific reason. No one, not even the employees who worked with her every day, knew what she was truly there to do. For weeks, she had moved silently through the office, listening to conversations, observing the actions of the people around her, taking note of every detail. She had gathered information that could bring down the most powerful people in the company. Her work as a janitor, seemingly insignificant to everyone else, had given her access to places others couldn't reach. She had the chance to hear things, see things, and learn things that no one else would ever know about. Emily was patient. She didn't rush. She knew that everything she needed would come to her in time. And she wasn't in any hurry. She moved through the building like a shadow, unseen, unnoticed, but always present. Each day, she gathered more evidence, piecing together a puzzle that would soon shatter the image of the company and its leaders. Today, however, was different. Today, she wasn't just cleaning. Today, she wasn't just moving from one task to the next. Today, Emily was preparing to let the world know just who she really was. It wasn't going to be easy. The people who thought they were above her wouldn't be happy. They'd try to stop her, maybe even threaten her, but Emily wasn't afraid. She knew she had something they couldn't ignore. She had power, hidden in the small details she had collected over time. Power in the notes she had made, in the emails she had found, in the conversations she had overheard. And the most important thing she knew? She had the truth. Truth was something the company's leaders feared. They had worked hard to hide their actions, to cover up the things they had done. They thought they were untouchable, above the rules, but Emily was about to prove them wrong. As she cleaned, Emily's mind raced. She knew what she had to do. She had to be calm, careful, and most of all, patient. She couldn't rush. There was no room for mistakes. Her entire plan had been building up to this moment, and she couldn't afford to mess it up. Every detail had to be perfect. She had to wait for the right time, the right moment to reveal herself and the truth she had uncovered. The office was quiet, almost too quiet. Most of the workers were in meetings or buried in their own tasks. It was the perfect time for Emily to make her move. She wiped down a desk, glanced around, and made her way toward the elevator. She knew exactly where she was going. The CEO's office was on the top floor, and that's where everything would unfold. But it wasn't just about confronting the CEO. No, this was bigger than that. This was about taking down the entire system of corruption that had been running the company for far too long. As she approached the elevator, Emily's heart beat faster. It wasn't fear that she felt, but a growing sense of determination. She had come too far to back out now. She had seen too much to turn a blind eye. She wasn't just cleaning up messes anymore. She was about to clean up something much bigger, something that had been hidden for years. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Emily stepped inside. The doors closed, and she stood in front of the buttons, her fingers hovering over the number for the top floor. Her reflection in the elevator mirror looked calm, collected, as if she were just another employee on her way to another task. But beneath that calm exterior, Emily was ready. She had prepared for this moment, and she knew what was at stake. Her hands shook just a little as she pressed the button for the top floor. She had come this far. She had collected everything she needed. Now, it was time to take the final step. The elevator slowly ascended, and Emily watched the numbers change as she moved higher in the building. As she neared the top, she couldn't help but think about how different her life had been just a few months ago. She had never imagined she would find herself in this position, on the edge of a confrontation that could change everything. When she had first started working at the company, she had been just like the other employees, working hard, doing her job, trying to get by. But she had quickly realized that something wasn't right. There were whispers in the halls, things being said behind closed doors. She started to notice patterns, things that didn't add up. And as the days passed, her curiosity grew. It was then that she had begun her investigation. Little by little, she had dug deeper, listening more carefully, paying attention to everything that was going on around her. She had become a part of the building, a part of the company, but all the while, she had been watching and waiting. She had kept a low profile, blending into the background, just another worker in a sea of faces. But now, the time had come. She wasn't just a worker anymore. She wasn't just a janitor. She was an inspector. And it was time for the truth to come out. The elevator doors dinged softly as they opened to the top floor. Emily took a deep breath and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cool up here, more sterile, more formal. This was where the real power of the company was, behind closed doors and shiny walls. This was where the CEOs, the managers, the people who ran the company worked. She knew that soon, everything would change. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Every corner of the office seemed to hold a kind of quiet hostility, an unspoken judgment that weighed on Emily as she moved through her day. She was used to it by now. She had learned to ignore the whispers, the sneers, the cold looks that followed her as she cleaned up after the people who worked here. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, just another person doing a job that didn't matter. The office workers barely noticed her as she swept the floors or wiped down desks. They were all too busy with their own lives, their own work. Some would look at her, maybe roll their eyes, and go back to whatever they were doing. Most didn't even make the effort to say hello. It was as if she was invisible, and that was how it had always been. But it wasn't just the regular office workers who overlooked her. There was Jeff Matthews, the CEO of the company. Jeff was the kind of man who believed his power made him untouchable, above everyone else. He wore expensive suits, drove a fancy car, and spoke in a tone that made it clear he thought he was better than anyone else in the room. And every time Jeff saw Emily, his expression hardened. He didn't look at her like a person. No, to him, she was just another worker, someone who was beneath him. His eyes would glance over her, and his lips would curl into a slight sneer. It was a look of contempt, of disgust, as if she were something dirty that didn't belong in his perfect world. "Get out of the way, girl," he would sneer as he walked past her. "You're blocking the path." His words stung every time. But Emily didn't let it show. She had learned long ago that the only way to survive in a place like this was to keep your head down, to act like nothing bothered you, even when everything inside you screamed. But Jeff's dismissive attitude was different. It wasn't just an offhand remark or an angry comment. It was a deep-rooted belief that she was nothing, just another cog in the machine, another face in the background. And Emily hated it. She hated being treated like she didn't matter. She hated being looked down on. But what hurt the most was knowing that she had to keep quiet, had to endure it, because she had a bigger purpose, a mission she couldn't afford to mess up. What Jeff didn't realize, though, was that Emily wasn't just cleaning up after him. She wasn't just another nameless worker doing her job. No, she was watching him, watching everything. She had spent months observing him, noting every conversation, every action, every mistake. She had seen the way he treated people, the way he treated her. But it wasn't just the rude comments or the arrogance that made Emily take note. It was everything. Every time Jeff made a phone call behind closed doors, every time he whispered to one of his managers, every time he made a decision that seemed a little too shady, Emily was there. She was listening, watching, and cataloging it all in her mind. Jeff Matthews, the CEO, thought he was above everyone. He thought he was untouchable, beyond reproach. But Emily knew better. She knew that people like Jeff always made mistakes. They always thought they were too smart to be caught, too clever to be discovered. But Emily was smarter. She was patient. She wasn't in a hurry. And while Jeff might have thought she was just another janitor, just another woman doing a job she didn't care about, he couldn't have been more wrong. As the days passed, Emily started to piece everything together. She started to see the cracks in Jeff's perfect world. The deals he made under the table, the lies he told, the shady business practices he tried to hide from the public eye, it was all there, right in front of her. And every time she saw another mistake, another lie, she made a note of it. She wasn't just cleaning the floors anymore. She was cleaning up Jeff's mess. She was putting the pieces together, preparing herself for the day when she would expose everything. Emily knew that when the time came, Jeff's world would come crashing down. But she had to be careful. She couldn't let anyone know what she was doing. She had to keep her cover. She had to be patient and wait for the right moment to make her move. And so, Emily went about her day, cleaning, watching, listening. She was careful to stay in the background, blending in with the other workers. But in her mind, she was already planning her next steps. She already knew how this story would end. But there was still more to uncover. Emily knew that she hadn't yet found everything she needed. There were still gaps in her investigation, still pieces missing from the puzzle. But she was getting closer. And every day, she was one step nearer to bringing down Jeff Matthews and the entire corrupt system he had built. The tension in the office was building. Emily could feel it, even in the quietest moments. She knew something big was coming. She could sense it in the air, in the way the employees talked a little more quietly, in the way Jeff's meetings seemed to run longer than usual. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was happening behind the scenes, and Emily was determined to find out what it was. Every time she walked past Jeff's office, she could feel his eyes on her, even if he never spoke to her directly. She knew that he hated her presence in the building. He hated that someone like her had the power to see everything he was doing, even if he didn't know it yet. But Emily wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She had a job to do, and she was going to see it through to the end. As the days passed, the tension continued to build. The walls of the office seemed to close in around her, and Emily knew that her time was coming. Soon, everything would change. The day was coming when she would have the proof she needed to take down Jeff Matthews and expose the truth for all to see. But Emily wasn't just doing this for herself. She wasn't doing it for revenge. She was doing it for everyone who had been overlooked, disrespected, or mistreated in this company. She was doing it for the workers who had been ignored, for the people who had been trampled on by the people at the top. The clock was ticking. Emily's investigation was almost complete. She could feel the tension growing, feel the weight of the truth bearing down on her. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. and soon, everyone would know her name. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's routine never wavered. Each morning, she arrived at the office with the same calm demeanor, her eyes scanning the surroundings as she pushed her cart down the corridors. She quietly swept the floors, wiped down counters, and emptied trash bins. It was the same endless cycle of cleaning that she had come to know so well. No one noticed her anymore. To them, she was invisible, a nameless figure who blended in with the background. They had grown accustomed to her presence and didn't think twice about it. But Emily was different. She wasn't just going through the motions of her job, she was observing, listening, and taking note of every small detail. Her eyes were always sharp, always on alert. She was learning more than she could have ever expected, information that, if used correctly, could bring everything crashing down. Every time she walked down a hallway, she could hear snippets of conversation. The whispers of employees talking about their bosses, their concerns about the company, and the deals that didn't sit right with them. It was like they thought no one was paying attention, like they could say whatever they wanted in the safety of their own little circles. But Emily was always there, just far enough away that they didn't notice her. She heard everything. She noticed the little things that no one else bothered with. "Did you hear about the tax issue?" one employee whispered to another in the break room. "It's not just a small mistake. This could be huge." Emily paused, pretending to tidy up the counter, but her mind was racing. Tax issues. That was something serious. She'd heard rumors about Jeff Matthews' questionable decisions, but this was different. The company's financial records were being manipulated, and someone was covering it up. "Yeah, but no one's going to say anything," another employee replied, their voice tinged with fear. "Jeff has everyone in his pocket. He's untouchable." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Untouchable. That's what everyone thought of Jeff Matthews, the CEO who ran the company like his own personal empire. He made the decisions, he held the power, and he could do whatever he wanted. But now, Emily knew something different. She knew the truth, and she wasn't about to let it slide. As she pushed her cart into the next hallway, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. It was just the tip of the iceberg. She could feel it in her gut. Something was terribly wrong with this company, and Jeff Matthews was at the heart of it. The days passed in a blur. Emily's routine remained unchanged, but her observations were far from ordinary. She had become a silent witness to the unraveling of a company that, on the outside, appeared to be successful and thriving. But behind the polished glass walls and expensive suits, there was corruption, dishonesty, and greed. Emily was uncovering the secrets that no one had dared to expose. Every day, as she cleaned the hallways and offices, she grew more and more convinced of what she had discovered. It wasn't just that Jeff was a poor leader. No, he was far worse than that. He was a corrupt leader, willing to do anything to protect his wealth and status. And the company, under his watch, was involved in illegal activities that could destroy everything they had built. Fraud, tax evasion, and other crimes were being committed under the guise of business as usual. Emily's anger grew with every passing day. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep the corruption ran. She had seen the records, overheard the conversations, and pieced together the puzzle. Jeff Matthews wasn't just taking advantage of his position, he was exploiting the very people who worked for him, the people who trusted him to lead them. And worst of all, he thought no one would ever challenge him. But Emily was different. She wasn't just another nameless face in the crowd. She wasn't just a janitor. She had been sent here for a reason. Emily had a purpose that no one else understood, not even Jeff himself. She was an inspector. For months, she had been working undercover, gathering evidence for a massive investigation that could shake the company to its core. Her role as a janitor had given her access to areas no one else could reach. She had been able to hear the conversations, see the hidden files, and piece together the evidence that would eventually bring down Jeff and his empire. But what frustrated her most was how blind Jeff was to the threat standing right in front of him. Every time he dismissed her, every time he scoffed at her as just a janitor, Emily's resolve only grew stronger. He had no idea that the very person he thought was beneath him was the one who would expose his lies. The more he underestimated her, the more determined she became to bring him down. She wasn't just waiting for the right moment to strike, she was creating that moment. The weeks passed in a blur of quiet observation. Emily moved through the building, collecting bits and pieces of information like a detective putting together clues. She had become a master of patience. There was no rush, no reason to act impulsively. She knew that when the time came, she would have everything she needed to confront Jeff. The more she learned, the more she realized that the stakes were higher than she had initially thought. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt CEO. This was about stopping a powerful system that had been hurting people for years. One evening, as Emily was cleaning the boardroom, she overheard another conversation that would change everything. The room was filled with the usual suspects: Jeff, his close advisors, and a few higher ups in the company. They spoke in low voices, but Emily's ears were sharp. She was always paying attention. "We need to get the audit reports under control," Jeff said, his voice cold and calculating. "If they find out what's really going on, we'll be finished." One of his advisors replied, "We've been covering our tracks well, Jeff. No one can trace the money, not unless they have access to the internal records." Emily's heart raced. Covering tracks? Internal records? She had seen some of those records. She had been inside the system, and she knew that if someone were to dig deep enough, they would find evidence of the fraud. It wasn't just about mismanaging money. It was about stealing from the very people who worked for the company, about deceiving investors, and about making deals that were meant to keep Jeff in power while ruining others. "I don't care what we have to do," Jeff continued, his tone becoming more urgent. "We need to make sure the auditors don't ask the right questions. I'm not going down for this." Emily's mind raced. She had to stop this. If Jeff was willing to go this far, there was no telling how much damage he could do before it was all over. She had to act, and she had to act soon. But Emily wasn't ready yet. She needed more evidence. She couldn't go in half-cocked, not when the stakes were so high. She had to be sure, absolutely certain, that she had everything she needed to take down Jeff and everyone who had helped him build this empire of lies. As she wiped down the table in the boardroom, her mind whirled with the possibilities. She was so close. The pieces were falling into place. She could feel it. And when the time came, when she had all the evidence in her hands, she would expose Jeff for what he truly was: a liar, a thief, and a man who had stolen from everyone, including the people who trusted him the most. The company had a cancer, and Emily was the only one who could remove it. It wasn't just about her now. It was about the future of everyone who worked there, everyone who had been hurt by Jeff's greed and corruption. But Emily knew the hardest part was yet to come. Taking down Jeff would be difficult. He was powerful, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. But Emily was ready. She wasn't going to back down. She had been waiting for this moment for far too long, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to stop her now. The day had come. Emily's heart raced as she walked past the security desk. It was the same hallway, the same marble floors, the same fluorescent lights overhead. But everything felt different. The air felt charged with energy, as if the whole building was holding its breath in anticipation. She wasn't pushing a cleaning cart this time. She wasn't carrying a mop or broom. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Today, she had come with a purpose. Today, she wasn't the quiet janitor. She wasn't invisible. No, today she was someone different. Today, she was the woman who would bring down Jeff Matthews. Her step was confident. her posture straight. Her eyes burned with a fiery resolve. She had been patient, quiet, and watchful for so long. But this moment had been coming. This was the moment when everything would change. As she walked through the building, no one recognized her. It wasn't that they hadn't seen her before, they had seen her every day. She had been invisible to them, a woman in a uniform who cleaned up their messes. But today, she wasn't wearing a uniform. Today, she was wearing a crisp, tailored suit that commanded attention. The employees who passed her by glanced at her for a moment, then quickly looked away. Their eyes lingered on her for just a fraction longer than usual, but they quickly dismissed her, assuming she was just another new executive or visitor. They didn't recognize her for who she truly was. And Emily let them continue to believe their assumptions. She was no longer the janitor in their eyes. She was someone who belonged in this building, someone who had a right to walk through these halls. Emily's heart beat in time with her footsteps. She knew that the path she had chosen wasn't an easy one. She knew that what she was about to do would change everything. But as she moved closer to the boardroom, her confidence only grew. She was ready. She had spent months gathering the information she needed, patiently watching and listening, recording every detail, every lie, every shady deal. Now, the time had come to use that information. The doors to the boardroom stood ahead, and Emily knew that the moment she entered, the game would change. She was no longer the observer. She was the one in control. She had the truth on her side, and she wasn't afraid to use it. When Emily entered the boardroom, all eyes turned to her. The room fell silent. The employees seated at the long, polished table stared at her in shock and confusion. The contrast was undeniable. Gone was the janitor's uniform, the simple shoes, the unremarkable cleaning cart. In its place stood a woman in a sharp, professional suit, radiating authority. Her posture was strong, her expression calm but determined. She was no longer invisible. Jeff Matthews, seated at the head of the table, was the first to react. His eyes narrowed as he saw her. He didn't recognize her at first. How could he? The janitor he had dismissed so many times now stood before him, transformed into someone he didn't know. A brief moment of confusion flickered across his face, followed by a smug smirk. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Emily cut him off. "Jeff Matthews," she said, her voice calm but sharp, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. "I think it's time you learned who I really am." The room fell deathly silent. Emily could feel the weight of every gaze on her. The employees who had once ignored her, who had seen her as nothing more than a cleaning woman, now looked at her with wide eyes. Their confusion was clear. But Emily didn't care about their confusion. This wasn't for them. This was for Jeff. Jeff's confident smirk faltered, then quickly vanished. His eyes widened, his face turning pale as he realized who she was. The woman who had spent months quietly cleaning the floors, quietly watching everything, quietly gathering evidence. The janitor he had so often dismissed had been right under his nose all along, and now she was standing before him with the power to bring him down. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mouth worked silently as he tried to understand what was happening. But it was too late. The truth was already in motion. Emily took a step forward. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. She placed them on the table with a soft thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room. The employees watched, their eyes shifting between Emily and Jeff. "These," Emily began, her voice steady and full of authority, "are the documents that prove everything. The records, the financial statements, the communications. Everything you've tried to hide. It's all here. Every lie, every shady deal, every illegal activity. You've been under investigation for months, and today, it's over." She didn't need to say more. The documents spoke for themselves. The evidence was undeniable. The corruption that Jeff had tried so hard to conceal was laid bare for all to see. For a moment, the room remained silent. Jeff sat frozen, his face pale, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. The employees around him exchanged uneasy glances, slowly beginning to understand the weight of the situation. Emily had been gathering evidence for months. She had been quietly documenting every mistake, every crime, every dishonest decision Jeff had made. And now, she was presenting it to the world. Jeff's hand trembled as he reached for the papers. His eyes scanned the documents, the realization sinking in slowly. The walls were closing in on him. There was no escape. The empire he had built on lies was about to crumble, and Emily was the one who held the power to bring it all down. "You think you can destroy me?" Jeff finally managed to stammer, his voice shaking. "You think you can take me down with these?" He slammed the papers on the table in a fit of anger. "You're just a janitor. What do you know about running a company? What do you think you can do?" Emily didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. She had heard the arrogance in his voice so many times before. She had been his target, his punching bag. But now, the tables had turned. Now, she was the one in control. "I don't need to know how to run your company," she said calmly. "I just need to know how to stop people like you from hurting others. And I've done that." Jeff's face reddened with fury, but there was nothing he could do. The truth was out. The evidence was there. And Emily had made sure that nothing could stop it. The employees around the table sat in stunned silence, their minds slowly processing what was happening. They had always known that something wasn't right with the company, but they had never imagined it would come to this. Jeff Matthews, the man they had followed for years, was nothing more than a fraud, a liar, a thief. And Emily, the quiet janitor, had been the one to uncover it all. "Security," Jeff spat, his voice trembling with fear, "get her out of here." But Emily didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Jeff. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of anyone anymore. She had come this far, and nothing could stop her now. "Security," Emily said, her voice still calm, "you're too late. The investigation has already been handed over to the authorities. You can't cover this up anymore." The room was silent again. Jeff's face fell. The employees looked at each other, some with disbelief, others with a growing sense of admiration for the woman who had exposed the truth. "You're finished," Emily said, her voice steady and resolute. "The company is going to be cleaned up. And you're going to be held accountable for everything you've done." She turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a room full of stunned employees and a CEO whose empire was crumbling before his eyes. The day had come, and Emily had won. The once powerful CEO was now nothing more than a man in handcuffs. His face was pale, his body stiff with a mixture of fear and disbelief. As he was escorted out of the building by security, he moved slowly, as if trying to resist the inevitable, but there was no way out. The towering figure of Jeff Matthews, the man who had once held all the power in the company, was now reduced to someone who was being escorted out like a criminal. His smirk, his arrogant attitude, and his cold demeanor were gone, replaced by panic and the harsh reality that everything he had worked so hard to build was crumbling around him. The employees who had once ignored or mocked Emily now stood in stunned silence, their eyes following Jeff's departure. They had watched it all unfold, from Emily's quiet and unassuming presence in the building to the dramatic confrontation in the boardroom. They had all underestimated her. To them, she was just the janitor, the invisible woman who cleaned up after them. They never realized that she had been watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment to make her move. They never realized that Emily was the one who had the power to bring down someone like Jeff Matthews. But now they knew. As they stood in the lobby, watching the man they had once idolized being led out in disgrace, they realized how wrong they had been. They had all assumed that Jeff was untouchable, that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. They had thought that he was too powerful, too important to be held accountable for his actions. But Emily had proved them wrong. She had exposed the truth, and in doing so, she had shown them that no one, no matter how high they rose, was above the law. Emily's heart swelled with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had done what she set out to do. She had brought the truth to light, and the world had seen it. But there was still work to be done. The company couldn't remain the way it was. It needed change, real change. It needed a fresh start, one that was free from the corruption and lies that had been allowed to fester under Jeff's leadership. With Jeff gone, the company was forced to restructure. New leadership was put in place, people who were committed to doing what was right. The old, corrupt systems were torn down, and in their place, new rules were established, rules that prioritized fairness, honesty, and respect for all employees. It was a long road ahead, but the company was on its way to recovery. And Emily had been the catalyst for that change. The employees, who had once turned a blind eye to the wrongdoings of those in power, now had the chance to rebuild the company with integrity. They could finally work in an environment where they weren't just cogs in a machine, where they were valued, respected, and treated with fairness. The toxic atmosphere that had once suffocated them was gone, replaced by a sense of hope for the future. As for Emily, her role was over. She had done what she came to do, and now it was time for her to step away. She had given everything to this cause, and she had won. But while her part in the story was finished, her impact would be felt for years to come. She walked through the halls one last time, taking in the sights and sounds of the new, cleaner environment. The office no longer felt cold and oppressive. The employees were chatting quietly with each other, smiling, and the energy in the air was different, lighter. The silence that once hung heavily over the office was now filled with the sounds of collaboration, of people working together toward a common goal. It was a small change, but it was a change for the better. As Emily reached the door, she paused for a moment, glancing back at the building. The company that had once been run by greed and fear was now a company that had a chance at redemption. The work wasn't over, but it had begun. Emily knew that she had done the right thing. She had made a difference not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly. For everyone who had been overlooked or dismissed. She had shown them that they had a voice, that they mattered, and that no one should ever have to feel powerless in the face of injustice. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway as she left the building, a sense of quiet pride swelling in her chest. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need praise. She had done what she came to do, and that was enough. The company had been changed, and the people who had once disregarded her now saw her for who she truly was, someone who had the courage to stand up for what was right. As Emily stepped out into the cool air outside, she took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She had done something that no one had expected, and it felt good. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt free. She had accomplished her mission, and the world around her was better for it. But as she walked away from the building, she knew that there were other battles to fight. There would always be people like Jeff Matthews, people who thought they could get away with anything because of their power and influence. But Emily wasn't afraid. She had proven to herself and to the world that one person, no matter how small or overlooked, could make a difference. And that was the lesson she wanted everyone to remember: no one should ever be underestimated. Not because of their job, not because of their position, not because of their status. Everyone had a story, everyone had a purpose, and everyone had the power to change the world. As Emily disappeared into the distance, her steps growing quieter with each passing moment, the employees inside the building began to realize something they hadn't before. They realized that Emily wasn't just a janitor. She was a hero. She had taken down the corrupt CEO, exposed the lies, and helped to rebuild the company into something better. And because of her actions, the company would never be the same again. In the end, it was the quietest person in the room who made the biggest difference. The person who wasn't afraid to stand up, who wasn't afraid to take a stand against what was wrong, even when no one else had the courage to do so. And because of that, Emily Dawson's legacy would live on, not in the walls of the company, not in the offices or boardrooms, but in the hearts and minds of the people who had been touched by her bravery, her courage, and her unwavering determination. And that was the true power of the story she had written. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the most power. And those who judge by appearances, they're the ones who never see it coming. Emily Dawson had always been underestimated. She had lived most of her life as the person no one noticed. As a young girl, she was shy and reserved, never one to speak up when others did. As an adult, that same quiet nature followed her, making her invisible in the eyes of others. But Emily had learned something very important over the years: being quiet didn't mean being weak. It didn't mean being powerless. In fact, it was the opposite. She had known all along that the world wasn't always fair. That people like Jeff Matthews, powerful, arrogant, and blind to their own faults, were often the ones who held all the cards. But what Emily had discovered through her quiet observance, her patience, and her determination, was that true power didn't come from making the most noise. It didn't come from pushing others down or forcing your way to the top. True power came from understanding, from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, from knowing when to wait and when to act. As she walked away from the building, feeling the cool breeze against her face, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had started as nothing more than a janitor, an overlooked worker in the eyes of those around her. But she had been so much more than that all along. She had carried the power of knowledge, the power of patience, and the power of resilience. When Jeff Matthews had sneered at her, dismissed her, and treated her like she didn't matter, she hadn't reacted in anger. She hadn't lashed out. Instead, she had quietly observed, collected evidence, and prepared for the moment when she would show the world the truth. And when the time came, she did it with grace and strength. She didn't need to shout or demand attention. She simply revealed the truth, and the truth had done all the work for her. It was in that moment, standing in the boardroom with Jeff Matthews exposed for the fraud he was, that Emily realized something powerful: she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. The people who had underestimated her, who had mocked her, who had seen her as nothing more than a lowly janitor, they were the ones who had missed the point. They were the ones who had failed to see the strength within her. And now, they had no choice but to recognize her for what she truly was: someone who had the courage to take down the system that had been built on lies. There were so many lessons to be learned from Emily's journey. The first was this: never judge someone by their appearance. Never assume that just because someone seems quiet or invisible, they are weak. Because the truth is, the quietest person in the room often knows the most. They observe, they listen, and they learn. And when the time comes, they are ready to act in ways that others cannot even imagine. Emily's story wasn't just about exposing a corrupt CEO. It was about so much more than that. It was about standing up for what's right, even when no one believes you can. It was about showing people that they don't have to be loud to make a difference. They don't have to be flashy or boastful. They don't need to fight with force or anger. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait for the right moment, gather the information you need, and then let the truth speak for itself. Her actions proved that change didn't always come from the loudest voices or the most powerful people. Sometimes, it came from those who were overlooked, who were dismissed, who were written off as inconsequential. Sometimes, change came from the quietest person in the room. Emily had spent so long feeling small, feeling like she didn't matter, that it was hard for her to accept the truth of her own power. But by the end of her journey, she had learned a powerful lesson. She had learned that her quiet strength was enough. She had learned that her patience, her determination, and her ability to observe and listen were the very things that had allowed her to achieve what others thought was impossible. And in the end, that was what made her powerful. As she walked away from the company, knowing that it was finally on the path to recovery, Emily realized that the journey wasn't over. The lessons she had learned would stay with her for the rest of her life. She would always remember that strength wasn't about making noise. It wasn't about commanding attention or forcing your way to the top. Strength came from within. It came from knowing who you were, understanding your purpose, and having the courage to follow through, even when no one else believed in you. The truth had set the company free. It had taken down the corrupt CEO, brought justice to those who had been wronged, and shown the world that one quiet, determined woman could change everything. But more than that, it had set Emily free. Free from the doubts, free from the insecurities, and free from the fear that had held her back for so long. Now, Emily could walk into any room with her head held high, knowing that she had the power to make a difference. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She had already done that. And as she looked around, she saw that the world was full of people like her. Quiet, determined, and strong. People who had the power to make a difference, even if the world didn't see it yet. They just needed the courage to believe in themselves and the patience to wait for the right moment to act. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the most power. And those who judge by appearances? They're the ones who never see it coming. Emily Dawson had proven that beyond a doubt.